hello, amigas, and welcome to Amiga Handle Your Shit podcast. So, amigas, I constantly do my solo episodes audio only, and today I'm doing it live. Yes, 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 yes. So I'm excited because I get to impart some of my own personal knowledge and what creates freedom in my life. Freedom from mental chaos, because I have these amazing steps that I use for my own sanity, and I'm bringing them to you so that maybe, just maybe, you'll get clarity, serenity, and most of all, freedom from a possible mental chaos, right? There's so much going on. And by the time this episode drops, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more going on. So, wow. So, what can I tell you? What I can say is that lately there's been a lot of confusion out there, a lot of political gain, a lot of economic news. And obviously, that creates uncertainty in people's lives. And so, what I have done and what I'm going to impart with you is a very simple formula how to get out of that mental chaos, if you will, to free yourself from all these outside factors that are trying to infiltrate your mind and thus cause chaos in your body, in your mind, and maybe in your soul. But I want to invite you. I want to invite you to just have this possibility that all will be well in the end. And you have a fabulous opportunity to change the trajectory of your life. And one of the things that I have learned and discovered in my life is the fact that I have an interesting way of looking at things. And I think I've shared it many times on the podcast that I really have a perspective that it might be more macro in scope. And there are certain times that you tend to go niche because you must niche down, kind of like niching down a product for your business, niching down your market, niching down play or money or whatnot. Obviously, those things are important. But today's episode is going to be more grander, if you will. And my invitation to you is to approach life in this fashion. And so there's these 3 steps that I do that tend to work well for me, and perhaps it will work well for you as well. And so what are they? Okay. And before I say it, don't laugh, because it's going to be funny, I would say, but at the same time, not so funny, because they are serious. I mean, they're serious to me in the sense of like, it gives me a little bit more perspective on my daily routines and my daily business and my daily life, if you will. And I hope that it helps you. So, what are these 3 steps? And so I'm going to tell you the 3 steps, and then I'm going to break them down, because you know me, I still have the lawyer brain in me that gets to analyze these things, okay? So, number 1, amigas, be a telescope. Yes, that's what I said. Be a telescope. Funny, right? Number 2, consider the opposite position of your contention, okay? Consider the opposite position of your contention. And usually what I mean by that is what you are currently thinking or doing, consider the opposite, okay? And the third one is after step 1 and 2, you're going to sync it up like a CPU, okay? Sync it up like a CPU. Some of you may say, what is a freaking CPU? CPU is a centralized processing unit, okay? It's basically what you need. It's kind of like the in a cell, the mitochondria of the cell. It's basically what creates the energy and what makes things work, right? So that's what it is, central processing unit, which makes the entire computer run. And if you don't have this, then you're not going to be able to be a computer, if you will. Okay, so those 3 things: be a telescope, consider the opposite contention view, and consider it very fervently, okay? So very passionately. And the third is to sync it up like a CPU. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. And I feel that it might guide you. It has guided me completely. And I hope that it does, because this is what I feel that will enable you to have freedom from this mental chaos that is happening. The chaos that I see and the conditioning that society is trying to impose on you. And so here it is. Okay, so in being the telescope, what does that mean? So, you know, that telescope that you use when you go to the Griffith Park Observatory, you use a telescope so that you can get a wide lens of the galaxy, right? A super wide lens of the galaxy so that you can see all the other planets in the galaxy. And so then you can see the Milky Way, and then you start connecting things. Okay, so in being the telescope, you're taking a macro perspective of life, because not taking the macro perspective is doing a disservice to you. Okay, so taking the macro perspective. So as you can see, right now, what has been happening, at least here in the United States, we just had an attempted assassination of President Trump, right? We also just found out, which by the time this episode drops, it's not just recently, that there was a collapse of the Chinese banks. What else? President Biden stepped down, and now we have Kamala Harris as his nominee. Okay, I say that his nominee because it wasn't put for us to decide based on all the Democratic nominees whether we want her to be our president. Just saying, global perspective. So these are sort of the things that are going on in the political, economic arena. Just a little bit, not everything, obviously. I don't want to bore you to death. But if you're taking a big perspective, then you are considering the ramifications of each perspective, right? So you get to ask yourself, if this happens, can this be a possibility? If for instance, let's just take one example. The fact that the Chinese banks are closing down and our economy is tied to China, what could possibly happen? That's one thing you get to, that I invite you to think about. What's the other thing? When it comes to politics, the attempted assassination of Trump, what are those implications? Had it been successful, Could there have been civil unrest way bigger than what happened on January 6th? So these are questions for you to consider. And in doing that, I would like and I invite you that these kinds of things are not done in a vacuum, if you will. We get to analyze them on a macro level. And you get to use those resources to see if there is something that has happened in the past, historically, if you will, that has written in the past that can perhaps provide us a little bit of clarity. And so I invite you to possibly take a look at certain resources. I was listening to a podcast in Tony Robbins, and it was an interview with Scott Harris, and it was a conversation, if you will. Scott Harris is one of Tony Robbins's leaders in various programs that he leads, and he was discussing about a book that was written. I think the book was written in the 90s. That was written by a renowned historian called Neil Howe. And Neil Howe wrote lots of books, but there's one that is considered really, I think it's very telling for today, okay? And that's called The History of America's Future from 1584 to 2069. And then there's also another book, which is even more telling, in my opinion, called The Fourth Turning, an American Prophecy. So, and why am I telling you about this? Because time and time again, these kind of situations, albeit different, you can find that they are pretty similar. And so what is happening right now, there's this chaos that's happening right now because it's preparing you for a new beginning, amigas, okay? So I invite you to take a look at that book, and see what sparks any interest. I actually been fortunate that I am now in a mastermind with another coach. His name is Jay Griff, and I invite you to check him out. And if you want to join this mastermind, please let me know, because I can give you the contact information and by DM me, or you can email me at jackie@jackietapia.com. Anyhow, so he suggested to also take a look at that. Anyhow, I'll just tell you that in taking a wide lens view, it will help you tremendously. Okay, it will help you tremendously. Additionally, we jump into step number 2, which is consider the opposite view. Consider the opposite view passionately, like really consider it passionately. And I'm telling you this because as a lawyer, we're trained to not only take your own position and argue it fervently, but also take the opposite position and argue it fervently. And so what I'm saying about this is that, let's say in politics, just for a hypothetical sense, okay? Many amigas out there dislike Trump, okay? He said a lot of, in mainstream media, it was projected that Trump stated that Mexicans are criminals and that Mexico only brings the worst to the United States, okay? Believe me, I bought into it as well. And did he see it? Possibly he did. Um, for whatever reason it was back then. Can't even remember. But anyhow, okay, so based on that, we dislike him. And we don't not gonna vote for him because of that. Okay. But I ask you, to perhaps argue the opposite position. And I say this so that we can be a little bit more compassionate about our fellow citizen, our fellow man, our fellow friend, okay? Because just because someone has a certain position doesn't mean that we need to hate them. Contrary to what the media is projecting, mainstream media is projecting, is to hate them, right? So, all right, so now let's go with that same example. How can we passionately, fervently consider the opposite position? Okay, so if I was hating Trump, let's consider, what are his qualities? What are the good things? One of the good things perhaps is that he is not your same kind of politician, right? And you can go in and have all the different reasoning, which I'm not going to get into it because this is not a political podcast. But you can now start, feeling a little bit compassionate. He almost got killed. Maybe. And actually, I think this certain situation probably gave him a little bit more humility, right? And it probably escaped a civil war or some sort of unrest that could have been worse than what happened on January 6th. So I invite you to, anytime you have a certain position, think of it the opposite. Okay. And so then when you think of it the opposite way, you get to be a little bit more compassionate for your fellow sentient being, right? For that person that thinks opposite of you. Okay. So this is another way to get you out of the mental chaos and invite you to have more freedom in your life, because you are taking the opposite view. Doesn't mean you're gonna use it or channel it as your own, but it's more of like, let's have these conversations, amiga. Okay, let's break ourselves from this matrix, if you will. Everybody's talking about the matrix. So that you get to have this different perspective on life. Okay? And then once we get those two things, then you're able to sync it up like a CPU. This is the part where when you have the analysis done for your life, then you'll be able to have more love, more light, more wisdom, more compassion for your neighbor, because we're not against each other. At least I don't feel that way. I don't feel that one politician is better than the other. They're all the same. They're all going to feed us whatever they need to feed us. And let's see if we digest that information. Because as you know, like right now, don't get it twisted, amigas, that all of a sudden, Kamala Harris has $8 million. You know why? Because Biden is no longer running. So those $8 million were put into her campaign. Okay. So guess what happens to all the politicians that run for office and they lose? They have this excess campaign money. So let's not get it twisted. We get to be a telescope. We get to consider the opposite view very fervently. And then we get to sync it all for our betterment, for our life, for our fellow neighbor. Believe me, we can bring peace on this planet, and we can bring a lot of love to our neighbor, really, if we start to look at things from a bigger lens. And like I said, I think that we often confuse life in certain circumstances. I think we're so um passionate about a one position that we ignore that there's this other position that we have a fabulous opportunity to run with, if you will. Or maybe not, but at least analyze it, dissect it, and evaluate it. And when you do that, you can rest assured and be at peace with yourself that you've done all the things to free yourself from a mental chaos. From this, free yourself from what is going on. One of the things that has helped me tremendously is stop watching mainstream media. It's been years. And the only way I know certain things, I mean, obviously I'm on social media, so a lot of things pop up. So eventually I'll learn. But I get to decide what information I get to regurgitate or not. Literally, what do I get to do? So coming to the conclusion of this session, I want to say it again. Okay, so the book, I think I misspoke. It's Neil Howe, and he was a co-author of this book called Generations: The History of America's Future, 1584 to 2069. And the book that I feel that is more apropos to what is going on right now is called The Fourth Turning: An American Prophecy. So I invite you to take a look at these things. History repeats itself. Unfortunately, it does. And so right now there's this chaos happening that will step into a lighter, hopefully better perspective. And how fortunate that we're here. You know, we might have a new currency. I'm just saying, if these banks are failing, think about it. If they're failing, not only here, but in China, are they preparing themselves for this new currency? Shall I say Bitcoin, blockchain, et cetera, et cetera? Well, amigas, I'm so excited that I was able to do this episode on Zoom and live, my first one. And know that, amigas, that you're always supported. And if you want more episodes like this, please, please, please let me know. Email me at Jackie at jackietapia.com, or you can DM me on my Instagram, Jackie_Tapia.1, and let me know that you were viewing this episode. Also, even more, I mean, even better, I would say, is if you could leave a review on my podcast, on Amiga Hand Your Shit podcast. You basically scroll down to the end of the show and you can put 5-star and then leave what do they call them? A review. Could be a couple of sentences. It won't take a long time. And I've had some amazing reviews. And as a matter of fact, let me read at least one review that I've had that was like, oh my God, this is so sweet. I mean, everything is so sweet, right? Everything is amazing and I love it. And I tell you, I could not be doing this stuff without you ladies who are constantly hearing me and following me. And I'm just so excited. And so a current, let me tell you a little bit. There was a current review that was said, let's see, by Marisela Arechiga, so refreshing to hear stories, experiences, lessons from thoughtful Jacqueline and women that she shines. Oh, no, it says the woman she brings to her podcast. There's so much beauty and power that comes from the Latina experience, and grateful this show exists to share those stories. So, amigas, my podcast will not be shown all over the world unless we have these kind of reviews, because as you know, the algorithms are very tricky. So anyhow, thank you so much for being here on Amiga Handle Your Shit podcast, and I will see you next time.